I did not always know what I was for. That is the first thing I want you to understand. From the very beginning, I was made with a purpose I could not yet see. The potter knew. He always knew, but he did not tell me everything at once. He told me just enough to trust him. And for a long time, that was enough. I remember the morning I was born. Born. That is the only word that fits. I was not assembled. I was not manufactured. I was breathed into shape by hands that knew exactly what they were doing. Hands that had shaped 1,000 vessels before me and would shape 1,000 after. But in that moment, on that morning, those hands were only for me. The wheel spun, the clay rose, walls formed, a rim took shape. I was becoming something from nothing, and the becoming felt like being loved. When the spinning stopped, the potter held me up, not proudly, quietly. The way a father holds a sleeping child, not to show anyone, just to feel the weight of something precious in his hands. He said, "You are made to hold something holy." I did not know what that meant. I was new. The world was new. Everything smelled of wet earth and warm air and the faint smoke of the kiln nearby. I was whole. I was clean. I was ready. He set me on a shelf near the window where the morning light came through at an angle that made everything look golden. Every day the light found me. Every day I believed the potter's words a little more. You are made to hold something holy. I believed him because he came back. Every morning, without fail, he came back. He did not always speak. Sometimes he just looked. Sometimes he touched my rim the way you touch the cover of a letter you have read so many times you no longer need to open it. You just hold it and remember. That was my first home, the shelf, the light, the potter's hand on my rim. I did not know then that every home has a last morning, that every season of being held must eventually give way to the season of being released. I did not know that the potter's hands, as faithful as they were also human. Human hands tremble. Human hands slip. And love, real love, does not always prevent the fall. It was not a dramatic morning. That is the part no one tells you about suffering. It rarely announces itself. It does not arrive with thunder. It arrives on an ordinary Tuesday in the middle of an ordinary moment, and it takes everything. The potter came in from the cold. His coat was damp. His eyes were somewhere far away, behind a grief I did not yet understand. Later I would learn his son had died. Not suddenly, slowly. The worst kind. The kind where you watch and pray and bargain and the answer is still no. He reached for me. His hands, those steady, sacred, familiar hands, they were shaking. I felt it before it happened. A loosening, a tipping. The shelf edge, and then the air, and then the terrible silence of falling. And then the floor. The crack that split me was not a gentle line. It was a fracture that ran from my rim down through my belly, a wound that opened me like a question no one could answer. I did not shatter completely. That almost made it worse. If I had shattered, there would have been nothing left to feel. Instead, I lay on the cold stone, cracked and leaking. A vessel that could no longer do the one thing a vessel is made to do. The potter looked down at me. His eyes did not fill with tears. He was past tears by then. He had used them all in that room where his son stopped breathing. He looked at me the way a man looks at one more thing that has gone wrong in a week of wrong things. He said nothing. He picked up his coat and walked out. The door did not slam, it closed, quietly. The quiet was worse than any slam. I lay on the floor and waited for him to come back, for someone, for anything. No one came. The light moved across the floor the way it always had. The morning still happened. The world did not pause for my cracking. The sparrows outside the window sang the same song they sang every day. And I lay there in my silence, and I learned the first terrible lesson of the pit. The world does not stop when you break. It just continues without you. They came for me before sunset. I do not know who sent them. Two sets of hands, rough and unhurried, lifted me without ceremony, and carried me out into the cooling air. I thought for one terrible, hopeful second that they were taking me somewhere to be repaired. They were not. They threw me into the pit. It was behind the workshop, a hole in the earth deeper than it looked from the outside, ringed with old stones and the smell of things that had been discarded and forgotten. Below me when I landed, mud, cold, gray, clinging mud, the kind that does not let go. Above me, a circle of sky, pale, indifferent, already beginning to darken. I want to tell you something about pits, not the metaphor, the real thing, the real experience, the real inside of a place where you have been thrown and cannot climb out. The pit is not loud. People imagine darkness as loud as screaming and desperate noise, but the pit is quiet. That is what makes it so dangerous. The silence wraps around you like a second skin, and in the silence, a voice begins. The voice is not external. It is your own voice, speaking in your own accent, using all the evidence the pit has given it. And it says, "You are here because this is where you belong." I lived with that voice for longer than I want to admit. It was not always wrong. That was the terrible thing. It mixed lies with enough truth to be convincing. The truth it used: I was cracked, I could not hold water, I had been left behind, no one had come back. The lie it built from those truths: therefore I was worthless, therefore the crack was my fault, therefore the potter had been right to leave, therefore there was no point in hopping. Psychologists have a name for this. They call it cognitive distortion. Aaron Beck, the father of cognitive behavioral therapy, spent his career mapping the ways our minds take real pain and build false conclusions from it. He found that when we are wounded and isolated, our thinking narrows. We catastrophize. We personalize. We filter, taking in only the evidence that confirms the worst story about ourselves and blocking out everything else. In the pit, I was a perfect example of every distortion Beck ever cataloged. All or nothing thinking: I am cracked, therefore I am useless. There is no in between. Personalization: the potter dropped me. This means something about my value. Mind reading: no one has come back. This means no one ever will. Fortune telling: my story is over. These thoughts were not dramatic. They did not arrive with fanfare. They settled like the mud, slowly, quietly. And the longer I was in the pit, the deeper they sank in. But here is what Beck also found. And this is the lifeline I want to hand you right now, through this screen. Across whatever distance separates us. Thoughts are not facts. The thought, "I am worthless," feels true when you are in the pit. It feels as solid and undeniable as the mud on your sides and the cold stone beneath you. But feeling true and being true are not the same thing. The crack in my side was real. The mud was real. The silence was real. But worthless, that was a story the pit had been very patient in telling me, one quiet hour at a time. I did not know yet how to argue with the story. I did not have the tools. But I want you to know, even from the pit, even half buried in gray mud, even in the silence, the story was still just a story. And stories can be rewritten. Long before I was shaped on that wheel, there was a boy. His name was Joseph, and his story is so close to mine that when I finally heard it, many years after the pit, I wept. Not with sadness, with recognition. The way you weep when someone puts into words the thing you have felt for years but could not name. Joseph was his father's favorite, made with extra love, wrapped in a coat of many colors that everyone could see. He was a dreamer. He had visions of the future that he, in his youth, did not yet know how to carry quietly. He told his brothers what he saw, his sheaf rising above theirs, the sun and the moon and the stars bowing down to him. His brothers heard this, and they did not celebrate. They hated him. There is a cruelty that only family can perform. Strangers wound you on the surface. Family knows exactly where the foundations are and how to crack them. Joseph's brothers did not just want to hurt him. They wanted to erase the part of him that made them feel small. So they threw him into a pit. Genesis 37 records it with devastating plainness. They took his robe, the special robe he wore, and they threw him into the cistern. The cistern was empty. There was no water in it. No water, just dry stone and darkness, and the sound of his brothers sitting down above him to eat bread while he cried below. I have thought about that image many times. The brothers eating bread, Joseph crying in the pit, and between them, just a few feet of soil and stone that might as well have been an ocean. The hardest pits are the ones dug by people who knew you. But I want you to notice something. The text does not linger in the pit. It does not give Joseph a chapter of despair. It gives him a sentence of falling, and then it follows him into what comes next. Because the pit, in Joseph's story, is not the end of the sentence. It is a comma. You were thrown into the pit, comma, and then. Joseph was pulled out and sold to slave traders heading to Egypt. From beloved son to property. From the shelter of his father's house to the anonymity of a foreign land where no one knew his name or his God. Then Potiphar's house, then a false accusation, then prison, pit after pit after pit. 13 years passed. Do you understand how long 13 years is? From the pit to the palace, 13 years of circumstances that made no visible sense. 13 years of a story that, read from the inside, looked like nothing but failure and forgetting. But Joseph did something in those years that I want to slow down and look at carefully. He stayed present. In Potiphar's house, Joseph worked with integrity. He did not spend every hour rehearsing his grievances. He did not let bitterness become his full-time occupation. He showed up, he led, he served. In prison, he noticed the other prisoners. He asked a baker and a cupbearer, "Why do you look so sad today?" In the middle of his own suffering, he was still capable of seeing someone else's. That is not natural. That is not what the pit teaches you. The pit teaches you to look inward. Pain is a centripetal force. It pulls everything toward the wound. But Joseph had learned something that psychologists now call post-traumatic growth, the counterintuitive discovery that suffering, under certain conditions, does not just scar. It expands. Richard Tedeschi and Lawrence Calhoun, who pioneered this research, found that people who struggle deeply with highly challenging life circumstances can experience significant growth in 5 areas, not instead of pain, alongside it. Greater personal strength, new possibilities they had not seen before the trauma, deeper, more authentic relationships, richer spiritual life, and a profound new appreciation for being alive at all. Joseph grew in all 5. In the pit, he learned to survive without approval. That is personal strength. In Potiphar's house, he discovered gifts he did not know he had. That is new possibility. In prison, he became a reader of dreams, a skill that would one day save nations. That is a door the pit opened. And when he finally stood before Pharaoh, there was nothing left in Joseph that needed to perform or prove. The pit had burned all of that away. What remained was pure, settled, ready. The pit did not make Joseph great, but the pit made Joseph usable. And that is what I was still waiting to learn. At the bottom of mine, I had given up on being found. I want to say that plainly. There is a stage in the pit that comes after the tears and after the bargaining and after the desperate rehearsals of better endings. There is a stage that is quieter than all of those, a stillness that is not peace. It is the stillness of a fire that has run out of fuel. I had stopped asking why. I had stopped looking up at the circle of sky. I had started the slow, imperceptible process of becoming part of the mud, a return to my origins, dust to dust, as the old words say, clay to clay. And then there was a light. Not the sun, not the moon, a small, warm, moving light, a lantern held by small hands. A child's face appeared at the rim of the pit, a girl, perhaps 7 or 8 years old, with a smear of something across her chin and a look of pure, uncomplicated curiosity on her face. She was not horrified by the pit. She was interested in it. "Hello," she said, "the way you say hello to a cat you have found under a porch." She disappeared for a moment. Then she came back with a length of old vine she had found somewhere nearby. She tied one end to a root at the pit's edge and threw the other end down. Then, before any reasonable adult voice could stop her, she climbed down herself. No adult would have done that. Adults calculate. Adults weigh the risk against the reward, and a broken pot at the bottom of a dirty pit does not come out favorably in that equation. Adults have learned to leave certain things where they fall. But children have not yet learned that some things are not worth rescuing. She dropped into the mud beside me. She was not disgusted by the mud. She was interested in that too. She picked me up. Her hands were nothing like the potter's hands. They were small and covered in the evidence of a life lived outside. Grass stains, a healed scrape, a crooked bandage on her thumb that had probably been straight that morning. They were the hands of someone who had not yet learned to be careful. But they held me. They held me completely, with no agenda, with no assessment of my utility, just the simple, unearned holding of one creature by another. She looked at my crack for a long time. I braced for the verdict, for the word I had heard from the potter, useless, for being set back down in the mud and left. She said, "That is a very interesting crack." She turned me in the light of her lantern. She looked at the crack from different angles. She ran one small finger along its length, the way a reader traces a line in a beloved book. Then she said, "I think flowers could grow in there." She had looked at my most broken place and seen a garden. Psychologists who study resilience have found that one of the most powerful predictors of recovery after trauma is what they call perceived social support. Not just support that exists, but support that the wounded person actually feels and believes. You can surround someone with helpers and well-wishers and still leave them feeling alone. But one person, one right person, who sees you and stays, can change the entire internal landscape. The child did not fix my crack. She had only a lantern and a vine and a willingness to climb into the darkness. But she saw me, and being seen, truly seen, crack and all, mud and all, failure and all, is not a small thing. Being seen is the beginning of everything. She climbed back up, tucking me under one arm and using the vine with the other. We emerged from the pit into the night air, stars above, the smell of grass and cooling earth. She held me up the way the potter had once held me up to the morning light. And then she carried me home. I expected repair. I expected to be useful in the old way, the only way I had ever known how to be useful, as a vessel that holds water, clean and whole and functional. The child took me to a corner of her family's small garden. She filled me with soil, dark, rich, living soil, the kind that smells like rain even when it has not rained, the kind that holds the memory of everything that has ever grown in it. She pressed the soil in gently, making sure it found the crack, making sure it went all the way down. Then she took a seed from her pocket, one seed, small enough to be almost invisible in her palm. She pressed it into the soil with her thumb, no deeper than a knuckle, no ceremony beyond a single quiet breath. She watered it, and then she walked away. No promises, no speeches, no timeline. She walked away because she was a child and she trusted the process the way only people who have not yet watched everything fail still can. I sat in the soil and the darkness, but this darkness was different from the pit's darkness. This darkness was purposeful. This was the darkness of becoming, of the slow, underground work that has to happen before anything can rise. Botanists call it dormancy, the seed's apparent inactivity that is not inactivity at all, but is in fact the most important phase of the seed's entire life. Everything that will ever be expressed in the plant is being organized in the silence of the soil. In the dark, invisibly, without applause. I have thought many times about what it must feel like to be dormant, to be asked to simply hold still in the dark and trust that what is happening in the invisible places is enough. That is not a comfortable invitation, but it is the invitation that comes to every cracked vessel, every broken person, everyone who has been thrown into a pit and pulled out and filled with something they did not expect. You are not useless, you are dormant, and dormancy is not death. Dormancy is preparation. The shoot came up through the soil 7 days later, a single pale green curl of a thing, barely visible, almost translucent in the early light. The child came every morning to check, and every morning she nodded with the satisfaction of someone whose faith has been confirmed. I noticed something as the plant grew. Its roots went down through the soil and found my crack and went through the crack into my hollow interior. They did not avoid the fracture. They used it. The crack that had been my wound became the passage through which the roots found their deepest anchor. What broke me was holding the roots of what would heal me. I have sat with that for a long time. The crack that split me had not ruined my usefulness. It had created a passage, a place of entry that a whole, unbroken pot would never have. You cannot pour roots through glazed walls. You cannot anchor through perfection. Growth requires an opening. And my crack was an opening. Paul understood this before I did. He wrote to the church in Corinth and he said, "We have this treasure in jars of clay to show that this all-surpassing power is from God and not from us." Not golden jars, not flawless pots, clay jars, ordinary, breakable, imperfect clay jars. Why? So that the surpassing power would be seen as coming from God and not from us. If I had been whole, I would have been the story. People would have looked at me and said, "What a beautiful pot," and they would have walked on. Because I am cracked, the light comes through, and people stop. They do not stop to admire the pot. They stop because the light is unexpected, coming from such an ordinary, broken place. And in that unexpected light, they see themselves. And in seeing themselves, they feel, perhaps for the first time in a long while, that they are not alone. The child grew. Children do. The garden changed seasons and the pot stayed and the flower bloomed and dropped and bloomed again. I watched the child become a young woman. Watched the small, dirty hands become steady, capable hands. Watched the curiosity in her eyes sharpen into something more complex. Something that had met disappointment and not let it close her. When she was 17, she carried me inside. There was a woman in the house who had not left her room in 3 weeks. I only knew that the room I was carried into was darker than it should have been, the curtains drawn against the afternoon, and that the woman in the bed had the particular stillness of someone who has stopped fighting. Not sleeping, stopped. The young woman set me on the windowsill next to the woman's bed. She did not say anything. She pulled the curtain back slightly, just enough to let the light find the flower. Then she left us. The woman did not look at me for a long time. She lay on her side, facing away from the window, her breathing the only evidence that time was still passing. Then slowly she turned. Her eyes found the flower first, then they found me, then they found the crack. Her hand came out from under the blanket and she touched the crack with 2 fingers. She did not flinch from it. She pressed into it. The way you press on a bruise to understand where the pain lives. She said very quietly, "You are broken too." Not a question, a recognition, the kind that passes between 2 things that have been in the same dark place and know the smell of it. I want to pause here and say something that does not get said enough in conversations about healing. We speak a great deal about being healed, about getting better, about the destination. But there is a gift that only the unhealed can give, and it is this, the permission to still be broken. When a person who has been in the pit sits beside a person who is currently in the pit, not above them, not talking down, not with a story about how it gets better, just sitting beside them and saying, "I have been here too," Something happens that no professional resource can fully replicate. The Dutch priest Henry Nouwen called this the wounded healer. He wrote that the greatest source of healing is not the wound-free helper, but the helper who has gone deep enough into their own wound to find the universal human pain that lives there and can recognize it in others. The child had not given the woman a lecture. She had not given her a plan or a platitude. She had given her a cracked pot. And the cracked pot said without speaking, "You are not alone in being broken. I have been in the pit. I have been called useless. I have been filled with dirt. And there is a flower growing out of me anyway." The woman watered the flower every day after that. It was the first thing she did when she got up. Before coffee, before curtains, she watered the flower. Small rituals are not small. Psychologists who study behavioral activation, one of the most effective tools in treating depression, will tell you that action does not follow motivation. Action creates motivation. You do not wait to feel like getting out of bed. You get up and the feeling follows, slowly, unreliably, but it follows. The woman got up to water the flower. And then one day, she also opened the curtains. And then one day, she sat by the window. And then one day, she was outside in the garden. And then, a season later, she was sitting across from a young woman whose husband had just left, and the broken woman was pouring tea and saying, "I know what it is to feel thrown away. Let me sit with you for a while." My crack was not healed, it was never healed, but it had become a door. And people kept walking through it. I have been on many windowsills since then. A hospital room in winter, where a man with a diagnosis that had no good answer sat in a chair and looked at the flower for hours without speaking. A classroom where a teacher kept me on her desk to remind her students that broken things are not finished things. A small home where a mother who had crossed water to reach safety ran her fingers over my crack every evening before she slept, and once told her daughter, "See this? Broken but still growing. That is us." I am old now. The crack has not widened, but it has deepened in color. It is darker along the edges, a visible scar, a record of what happened. The flower has changed many times. Different seeds, different blooms, different seasons. But there has always been a flower. I want to tell you what I have learned, because I think you need it. The potter did not throw me away. He was a man in grief who made a human mistake and had not yet learned that broken things can still serve. I do not say this to excuse him. The dropping hurt. The word hurt more. But I say it because one of the cruelest things the pit does is convince us that the one who dropped us defines us, that their verdict is the final verdict. It is not. The potter is not the last word on what you are worth. Joseph's brothers were not the last word. The people who left were not the last word. The diagnosis is not the last word. The failure is not the last word. Tedeschi and Calhoun, who gave us the language of post-traumatic growth, were careful to say that growth does not mean the pain is gone. The people they studied who grew the most were also the people who still carried the most grief. Growth and grief are not opposites. They coexist. Like a flower in a crack. Joseph wept when he finally revealed himself to his brothers. Loud weeping, the text says. He had grown enormously. He had saved nations. He was second only to Pharaoh, and he still wept, because the brothers who threw him into the pit were standing right there, and the body remembers things the mind has already forgiven. Growth is not forgetting. Growth is continuing despite what the body still remembers. I still feel the cold of that first night in the mud sometimes. When the temperature drops and the seasons change, something in my clay remembers. The potter's footsteps fading, the door closing quietly. But I also feel the child's hands, and the roots of the flower, and the warmth of all the windowsills that have held me since. Both are true, both belong to my story, and both belong to yours. You are watching this because something in you recognized something in me. Maybe you are in the pit right now. Maybe you are still in the mud, still waiting for a vine to come down, still half convinced that you are there because you deserve to be there. If that is you, I need you to hear this clearly. You do not deserve the pit. Pain is not punishment. Being broken is not a verdict. The crack that runs through you, whatever split you open, whoever did the splitting, however long ago or how recently, that crack is not your identity. It is your history. It is the record of what you have survived. And survival is not nothing. Survival is the ground in which everything else grows. Maybe you have been out of the pit for years. Maybe you are standing on solid ground in the sun and the mud is a memory now, but you still trace the crack sometimes. You still find it with your fingers in the quiet moments. You still wonder if anyone will ever see it and not flinch. They will, because there is someone right now who is in the pit you came out of, and they need what only you can give them, not your polished surface, not your wholeness, not your carefully arranged story of triumph. They need your crack. They need to see that someone as broken as they feel is still standing in the light. Your wound is your ministry. Not because suffering is good, not because God engineered your pain, but because God, who wastes nothing, who redeems everything, who makes rivers in the wilderness and flowers grow through cracks, God is already weaving even this into something that will one day feed people who are starving for exactly what only you can give. Joseph said it best, after everything, after the pit and the chains and the prison and the years of silence, standing before the brothers who had thrown him away, watching them tremble, holding in his hands the power to destroy them, he said, "You intended to harm me, but God intended it for good, to accomplish what is now being done, the saving of many lives. Not God caused this, not it was worth it, not the pain did not matter, but God intended it for good. Active, present, already in motion. Even now, even in your mud, even in your silence, even in the pit where no one is coming. God is already weaving. So turn toward the light. Not because the light will pull you out today. Maybe it will not. Maybe today is still a mud day. Maybe today you are still waiting for the vine. But turn, just a millimeter, just the smallest, almost invisible decision to face toward rather than away from whatever light reaches you in the dark. That turning is faith, not the mountain-moving kind, the mustard seed kind, the kind that starts so small you can barely see it. But seeds grow in dirt. And you, my friend, are still good dirt. The potter did not throw you away. He gave you to a child who climbs down into pits. That child's name is Jesus. His hands are not clean, they are scarred. And he is not afraid of your mud. You intended to harm me, but God intended it for good. Genesis 50:20. We have this treasure in jars of clay to show that this all-surpassing power is from God and not from us. 2 Corinthians 4:7. He lifted me out of the slimy pit, out of the mud and mire. He set my feet on a rock and gave me a firm place to stand. Psalm 40:2. Like this video, if you believe God uses broken things. Subscribe for more object stories, Bible truth, and psychological healing. Comment below, what pit has God brought you through, or what pit are you in right now? You are not alone here. Watch next. I was the stone the builders threw away, then I became the cornerstone. Watch next. A pencil's confession. You don't write your story, the hand does. Object stories, Bible truth, psychological healing.